Catherine, am I correct that Linnell is not here this evening?
She will be here.
Oh, there
She
is.
was just
I
on
see her.
and
I see her. She's an attendee right now.
okay, let me promote her. And for some reason, it's saying that you're Marty Brown, Chief Gankaz. So both Sylvia and Marty should be co-hosts.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Mike, do you know you're listed as Marty?
He does.
I'm okay with that. If you are Marty.
You can rename yourself if you want.
Oh,
Should I log out and log back in under a different one?
No, you
can
just
type
right
your
click.
name.
Right click and it says rename. You type in your name.
Right click on the screen on me.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh yeah, I see it. Hey, fantastic.
Good to know that after 18 months, we can still learn things on Zoom.
Right? Yeah.
How's that? Is that better?
Yes.
Yes, much. I never really wanted to be a chief anyway. Sorry.
No.
Mike.
Not that glamorous.
Tough job.
As soon as Director Sheriff Watt arrives, I will call the meeting to order. And right on cue. Okay, it is 7:01 on June 29th, 2021, and I'm going to call a special meeting of the Kensington Police Protection and Community Services District to order. I'd ask the clerk to take the roll, please.
Director Deppie,
Here.
Vice President Natoli,
here.
Director Sheriff Watts,
Here.
President
Here. Okay, I'd like to first announce the results of our closed session meeting, which were that we had to continue the meeting due to a problem with the Zoom link. If you were a member of the public and tried to join the public part before the closed session, the link was not operating properly. So we are going to continue that meeting until after this meeting, and we will offer opportunity for public comment at the end of this regular meeting. And the first item on our agenda is a consideration of the appropriations limit. And I am going to remind the public that you have an opportunity at this time, before we get to that item, for public comment on items not on the agenda. Please raise your hand via Zoom, and please remember to limit your comments to no longer than 3 minutes, depending on, we have a normal amount of comments. I see Mabry Benson has her hand raised. I'm going to, Mabry, you should be able to unmute yourself and make your
okay.
comment.
Okay.
I just wanted to confirm that it worked because I want to make a comment later on. And last meeting, it just wouldn't work. And I've never had that problem before. Thank you.
Okay, test successful. Okay, so now on to our agenda. I see no more hands raised from the public. I'm doing everything on screen today. I apologize. It's going to take me a little while to manage between screens. So the first item is the consideration of the appropriation limit for FY 21-22. And this item is going to be introduced by Catherine Corsack.
Good evening, members of the board. The recommendation is to approve and adopt the resolution 2021-09 for affirming the establishment of the appropriations limit for fiscal year 2021-22. The resolution is attached as one of the documents. The rationale for the resolution is that in November of 1979, California voters approved a ballot proposition, the GAN initiative, Proposition 4, adding to Article 13B to the California Constitution, which sets forth budgetary guidelines limiting the level of most appropriation from tax sources that the state and most local government entities are permitted to make in any given year. The purpose of Article 13B is to constrain fiscal growth in government by limiting the proceeds of taxes that may be appropriated each year. The background is that each year a local government, including most special districts, must adjust its appropriation limit for two factors. The first is the change in the cost of living, and the second is the change in the population. The change in the cost of living must be calculated by using the percentage change in the California per capita personal income from the preceding year, or the percentage change in the local assessment roll from the preceding year due to the addition of non-residential new construction. For special districts, if the district is located entirely within one county, the county's population change factor is to be used. So that is for Contra Costa County. So this is the case for our district. The limit may be changed in the event of a transfer of fiscal responsibility. The California Revenue and Taxation Code, Section 2227, sorry, mandated that the Department of Finance transmit an estimate of the percentage change in population to local governments. The Department of Finance also transmits the change of cost of living price factor, and we've also attached that for your reference. It's a document from the Department of Finance, which is this, and the subject of it is the price factor and population information. So basically, we showed the calculation for the appropriations limit, and it is determined to be $5,048,492. And there's also a detailed calculation of this limit in the attachment. So this will be, just as a reminder, this is approved as a separate resolution, and then it's also within the budget. So that is the appropriation limit. Does anyone have any questions?
I see no hands being raised among board members. So I will check with the public now if there are any comments or questions on this item. I see none. So I would be happy to make the resolution if we're prepared to proceed, that the board consider resolution number 2021-09, a resolution of the Board of Directors of the Kensington Police Protection and Community Services District, affirming the establishment of the appropriation limit for FY 2021-22 pursuant to the attachments, that FY 2021-22 appropriations limit would be $5,048,492. Could I have a second?
Sylvia,
Yes,
I think your motion said we should consider the resolution, not adopt the resolution.
I will correct myself.
Thank you.
And recommend that, or that we adopt the resolution of this board, number 2021-09. A resolution of the Board of the Directors of the Kensington Police Protection and Community Services District affirming the establishment of the appropriation limit for FY 2021-22 of $5,048,492. And thank you, Director Debbie. Would you like to second it?
I'll second, yeah.
Great. Okay. Would the clerk please take the roll?
Director Debbie,
Yes,
Vice President Natoli,
Yes.
Director Sharis Watt,
Yes.
President Hasai.
Yes. Okay. Motion passes 4-0. And now we will go to the next item on the agenda. That is the consideration of the KPPCSD budget for the coming fiscal year. And General Manager Marty Brown will introduce this item. This is coming before the board for the second time following a meeting in June, as well as a public workshop on January 17th, which I would like to say was really informative. And I'm sorry it wasn't better attended by members of the public, but the members of the public that did attend participated very well and found it really great. So General Manager Brown.
Thank you. So I think we're going to go right to a relatively brief PowerPoint. Catherine, are you ready to bring that up? While she's bringing up the PowerPoint, this is to obviously to consider and hopefully approve this year's fiscal year 21-22 budget. So as you know, you have a staff report, the draft executive summary was attached to the staff report, as well as all the prior PowerPoint presentations from both June 10th and the community workshop on June 17th. And then of course, this PowerPoint as well was an attachment to all the materials for this item this evening. So with that, next slide. So really quickly, we thought we'd go through the high level numbers again and budget assumptions, then on to any changes that have been made and are proposed this evening compared to the June 10th presentation to the board. And then some staff responses to community recommendations that came in during the workshop on the 17th, as well as via email. And I just want to mention here that the sort of recommendations that are here in this presentation tonight are came in and were the criteria for including them in the matrix, if you will, that you'll see later on in the presentation was based on whether they were substantive changes that would, again, substantively change the budget outcome and the numbers, the overall numbers and the bottom line at the end of the day. We had some helpful corrections and oversight on staff's part that were made during the 17th workshop, but we didn't bother to include those because those were just corrections that needed to be made. They're not substantive changes to the overall budget. So with that, next slide. So again, hitting those high notes, the budget assumptions we made were that the board would consider and approve the CPI increase of 3.8%, which if the budget moves forward with everything that's in it this evening, including this proposed increase, a resolution will come back to the board on the July 8th meeting, specifically surrounding the CPI 3.8%, which you have to, according to the police tax, you actually have to pass a resolution in order to implement that CPI. So that'll be coming back on the 8th, assuming the budget is approved tonight. Did not include overall, public safety building, tenant improvement, relocation costs. We assumed we'd come back later when we had better estimates with a budget amendment. It includes a reimbursement from the OPEB trust of $50,000, discontinuing paying for retiree dental and vision. That's an annual savings of approximately $25,000. Cost allocation of staff time across 3 funds that would include the general fund, the newly established waste management fund, which we're proposing here, as well as the landscape lighting maintenance district fund, which already exists, and then establishing a new capital project fund as well. And then finally, the assumption that we would receive grant revenue from Proposition 68, which the district has already been approved for, but needs to identify a project, and reimbursement for Measure WW grant for the community center. Next slide. Total projected budget, the general fund is just over 3.5 million, landscape lighting district, 42,000 approximately, waste management fund that we would be establishing approximately 62,000, the capital project fund approximately $335,000, which is those grant monies that I just mentioned in the last slide, for a total operating budget of just over $4 million. Next slide. The audited starting fund balance as of June 30th, 2020 was a little more than 2.1 million. The projected ending fund balance tomorrow, basically, is projected to be a little more than 2.2 million. Total projected revenues, again, just over 4 million. Projected expenditures, approximately 3.8 million. The projected ending fund balance in June 30th of 2022, a year from now, is projected to be just over 2.4 million. And the projected general fund reserve is at 2.3 million for this upcoming fiscal year. Next slide. So changes to the budget since the first budget workshop on June 10th, as proposed here this evening. Next slide. So based on some feedback that we received at the June 10th board meeting, we removed the community center alarm for approximately $3,000, added in the windscreen for the backboard, which is a negligible cost, so there was no need to change that cost amount. There was a mistake in double counting police overtime, and so we corrected that, which was important. But we also did, after conferring with the police chief, we did increase the budget for overtime, just given our current staffing levels and projected ability to fill those vacancies from 120,000 to 200,000. We also proposed allocating a $25,000 for architectural design and structural engineering assessment for a new location for the KPPCSD. As we need to move forward relatively quickly with that, it seemed prudent to put in some placeholder for right now for preliminary architectural design and structural engineering assessment. And again, when we have a sense of a larger cost estimate for the entire construction of tenant improvements and relocation costs, of course, we would return to the board with any necessary budget amendment down the road. The projected general fund reserve, we didn't have that number for you last time. Again, it's just over 2.3 million. The overall, there were also just some overall budget refinement as a result of receiving actuals, which we didn't have all of those when we presented on June 10th, and more came in afterwards. So we moved from estimates to actuals in a number of line items through the budget. So there was just some adjustments there. And then per a prior commitment that the district made, we did contribute $2,000 towards the new kiosk. And that actually is coming out of this fiscal year, not the upcoming budget, but it seemed worth mentioning because it did come up at the June 10th meeting. Next slide. So those were all the changes that we recorded and as our recollection is, took direction on making changes to, or we needed to make changes as staff. This next section, and the last section, is to talk about some of the community recommendations that we received at the budget workshop, as well as via email. Some of those, the board also received some of those as well. And so this is a recommendations, and then the staff sort of responds to those recommendations. Next slide. One huge recommendation that would have huge budgetary implications that came in was from a member of the community was to basically not hire the 3 officers that we currently have vacancies for, to not change the administrative staffing structure, to postpone all work in the park until grant money can be received, and then not leasing a 4th new police car, which is proposed in this year's budget. So as you can imagine, with 6 sworn officers and one of them being a police chief, we're stretched pretty thin right now in the police department and already experiencing some levels of burnout and working hard to fill, hopefully, if approved tonight, those 3 additional positions. It just would be really untenable to not fill the 3 officer positions. The administrative staffing, as I stated last time, I think will provide for more consistent and better continuity of service delivery to the board and residents, and just make us a little bit more nimble in terms of response time with full-time dedicated staff. Park maintenance, again, there's an enormous amount of deferred park maintenance, and some of it is surrounding fire hazard, which is, and being, fire preparedness, which seems extremely important, and also an important consideration to the community as well. So many of the proposed maintenance for the park is related to fire preparedness and addressing fire hazard. And then the PD vehicle leasing, of course, we're trying to measure out, and meter out, if you will, replacing vehicles over time. Not replacing vehicles year after year means that we could end up having, 1 year where suddenly we're forced to replace several vehicles at the same time. So this seems like a better management practice to just try to do it gradually over time. Next slide. One concern that came up a couple of times from the public as well as from members of the board was about the middle management of the lieutenant position that's proposed. And so I'm actually going to turn this over to the police chief to address those concerns in this slide. Chief Gankaz.
Thank you, General Manager Brown. Good morning, good evening, members of the board, members of the community. I'll just run down some bullet points there with this middle management position. It does promote community-based activities and other public safety programs, which this lieutenant would oversee. Fills the gap between the executive, the chief of police, and the sergeants, the first line supervisors, and the Police Officers Association. It will provide an additional and much needed layer of supervision, leadership, and oversight of all operations. The lieutenant would conduct internal affairs investigations, allowing the chief of police to remain neutral and thus, when necessary, administer and recommend discipline. The lieutenant would act as a chief of police when necessary in my absence. It should be known middle management positions are part of an effective, proven structure across all law enforcement. The mid-level management positions are essential to promote succession planning across the ranks. It's supported by both prior interim chiefs of police, and I believe it's the best structure for the District of Kensington going forward. The captain's position is being replaced by this middle management position of lieutenant, and it should be noted that the lieutenant rank pay scale is much lower than that of a captain all across Contra Costa County. The middle management position that we would create here is part of a contemporary policing structure that is used widely in Contra Costa County and throughout law enforcement. And it provides that additional layer of management and quality control. The lieutenant will act as the direct supervisor for both patrol sergeants. And the uniqueness of our department allows the patrol lieutenant to continue working patrol duties when required. And this contemporary policing structure is recommended again by many chiefs in Contra Costa County, used by many chiefs in Contra Costa County. And from the organization that I came from was used effectively there as well. And I can't understate the need for supervision and continuity of operation. This lieutenant's rank will ensure that someone qualified is readily available to act as the chief of police in my absence. I believe the structure will promote increased productivity, mentorship, and succession planning within the ranks. It will also develop future chiefs of police, future sergeants, and a future lieutenant moving forward. So there will always be that continuity of operation running.
Thank you, Chief. I think it's also just worth mentioning, because we did get some feedback via email from a member of the public comparing Kensington to a couple of other jurisdictions. And I just want to mention that some of those jurisdictions, 2 out of the 3 of them have the entire sheriff's department behind them. So when they need to do internal affairs investigations, or they need additional officers because people are out sick or somebody's on workers' comp or something, they have a whole additional, organization behind them, because they're basically county sheriffs wearing city uniforms. So that makes a huge difference in terms of resources and support, which we clearly, we don't have as an independent police department. We don't, we can call on other departments in other jurisdictions for mutual aid, but they have to be called, and it is really has to be on a serious as need basis. They're not just there in the background as a resource, like in some of these other jurisdictions where the actual entire department really are sheriffs, again, in city uniforms. So I just wanted to make that point as well.
General Manager, I can touch on a few of those things if I just had 1 second. I'll touch on a couple of agencies. The city of Clayton, for example. Clayton Police Chief Elise Warren and I talked over the phone about her current situation and her structure. Chief Warren has been pursuing a lieutenant rank within her department for quite some time. She's temporarily using her third sergeant in a middle management administrative capacity. In fact, tonight, the Clayton Town Council is approving a measure to increase the administrative sergeant's pay to a premium status as a step towards implementing a lieutenant rank structure. Orinda and Lafayette were also used in comparison. Orinda and Lafayette police departments are generally similar in size to Kensington, and they do not have a lieutenant rank structure. However, they have the full administrative and middle management support of the Contra Costa County Sheriff's Department, like General Manager pointed out. For example, when the Orinda and the Lafayette police departments need to fill a vacancy, they do not have to recruit candidates, screen applicants, schedule interview panels, conduct background checks, schedule polygraph and psychological examinations, or outfit the new hires with all the necessary uniforms and equipment. These agencies simply call the main headquarters of the Sheriff's Department, or what a friend of mine called the mothership, and they have a deputy sent over. It's that simple. When they must ensure that they are complying with the mandatory training regulations set by post, they do not bear the burden of researching future classes, keeping track of compliance schedules, ensuring travel arrangements are made for officers in accordance with policy and procedure, schedule training evolutions, or prepare yearly training schedules. All this work is completed by administrative middle management staff at the Sheriff's Office. And when these agencies are faced with conducting an internal affairs investigation involving one of their employees for serious allegations of misconduct, the investigation is generally sent back to headquarters for follow-up. That unit is supervised by a lieutenant who supervises the entire investigation. The Sheriff's Office also handles their policy and procedure manual updates and implementation, which is provided to them by a lieutenant or captain at headquarters. And these agencies are absent of lieutenant rank partially because most, if not all, of the administrative duties are taken care of back at headquarters by sometimes entire units or divisions of management level officers supported by staff employees. That's just a little bit of research on how these contract cities are able to survive without the rank of lieutenant in their structures. The Kensington Police Department handles all of those duties internally, and all of those duties would be handled by a middle management rank lieutenant. Thank you, General Manager Brown.
Thank you. Next slide. So some other feedback that staff received either at the community workshop or via email was to maintain the $50,000 reimbursement OPEB trust, and it's not needed to balance the budget. And so we wouldn't be removing the $50,000 reimbursement, like July 1, the day after tomorrow. We would be waiting until the end of the fiscal year and only using it and removing it if we needed it. But in a budget, a budget is a strategy, right? And so you're putting out their strategy that you're asking your governing board, we're asking our governing board to approve. And part of that strategy in the event that we need it includes this reimbursement of the $50,000 from the OPEB trust. But again, we wouldn't anticipate removing that from the trust until the end of the fiscal year if we actually needed it. Police salaries are estimated at 1.2 million, and they seem about $200,000 too high. We talked about already the error that was made in the budget of double counting overtime. That said, we did increase overtime since the June 10th workshop. After consulting with the police chief, it seemed necessary given the challenges with recruitment right now and being down 3 officers. So we have corrected that mistake in the budget. Next slide. District needs to know how much actual unrestricted funds and cash flow that we have and how much is actually available. So you heard we now have the general fund reserve number, which we didn't have on June 10th of just over 2.3 million. So that is the number basically. And then the question was, why aren't we budgeting for relocation? I think I've addressed this several times about wanting to wait until I had more of a concrete estimate and then come back and make a budget amendment or ask the board if they would make an amendment to the budget once we have a better number, not just kind of a range or a wide ballpark. That said, though, I am asking for $25,000. So, we are asking if we can allocate $25,000 towards the initial structural engineering and design assessment. Next slide. Is there a plan to circulate an RFP, RFQ for a new service provider for waste management? That is a discretionary decision of the board, which, very quickly, just trying to keep our head above water with trying to finish the budget in June. But very quickly, obviously, we're going to have to come back to the board in July or early August for discussion on exactly how the board wants to approach that. So it's discretionary and there's not an answer at this point. Property tax projections seem low and underestimated. Again, we consulted with the county assessor's office and we used their recommendation after talking it through with them. We think it's fiscally conservative, but reasonable. In addition to hiring an architect to design tenant improvements, it was recommended that we hire a structural engineer to evaluate any building or relocation site. And as you heard earlier, we are planning to do that. Next slide. All right, well, that's it. That's the end of the presentation. And like I said earlier, there's an awful lot of attachments. I know there was a lot to go through, but we wanted to make sure that the board and the public had everything in one venue together, from detailed budget sheets to executive summaries to all the PowerPoints we've done so far for you to peruse in preparation for tonight's meeting. With that, that concludes my presentation, and staff are available to answer any questions.
Thank you. I am going to see if the board would like to pose any questions or get any clarifications based on the additional information from the packet and from tonight's presentation. Director Natoli, go ahead.
I'd like to compliment Catherine and Marty and Chief Gankaz. And as for the opposition to hiring 3 officers, I recall when I first came on the board that there were vacancies because of officers on admin leave or medical leave, and we had 3 officers down. We got many criticisms on that, and people expecting us to hire, even though we had those positions filled, they just weren't able to come on board. So I really encourage you and hope you are successful in hiring 3 officers, because it does put a great stress on all the officers with such a small department. So thank you.
Director Deppie.
I'll second thanks to the chief, Marty, and Catherine. It's a lot of work, I know, and it's been a progression of getting our budgets cleaned up, and every year it gets better. So thank you again. I do have some questions as far as the resolution of raising the amount of, was it Measure G? Why don't we just put that on the agenda if we're passing a budget, assuming we're going to pass that resolution? Wouldn't it be simpler just to put that on this agenda, pass it, and then pass the budget?
Yes, it would have been, although it wasn't caught until after the budget was actually published, because I think Catherine and I were so focused on getting all of the documentation, making sure we dot our I's and cross our T's, that it was an oversight. But we also looked at last year and realized you did it in July as well last year. So we knew we could do that.
Okay, but there's no reason why we couldn't have. It's just, okay,
No,
got it.
there's not.
Right. I'll leave discussion about the relocation fees and design. We've got a closed session about that, so I'll defer all that until our closed session. I think that's probably better. A question, you talked about the staff. Does a lieutenant work for the chief or the general manager?
The chief.
Okay, got it. And if we are hiring a lieutenant, and my concern as a board member, and even before I was on the board, most of the complaints or I guess comments about the police were people didn't see enough of patrol. They didn't see enough, either traffic control or crime patrol, or just in general visibility on the streets. And so I want to make sure that by hiring a lieutenant, we're not going to sacrifice the ability of the sworn officers to go out and do patrol. And so specifically, let's say will it be cases where you have the chief, lieutenant, and a sergeant sitting in the office instead of out on patrol? Will that ever happen?
Chief, I'll let you answer that.
Yeah, no, our lieutenant is, and our sergeants are considered working lieutenants and working
Okay.
sergeants.
Great. Okay, thank you. And you talk about the cost of the new administration versus the current administration. And my calculation is that the new administration costs $440K and the current administration is $394K. But I thought that by rolling 3 positions into one, we both get more efficiency and also some cost savings. So could you explain that?
So we actually, when we looked at it, we put police and admin together as a single unit of salary and benefits when we were talking about any kind of cost savings. So we haven't been dividing it out. If you recall from the June 10th presentation, we actually had the lieutenant position listed in, because that's a new position, in with the staff and part of the calculations that we were coming up with. So we're not separating them out as though there's admin over here and police here like different agencies. We're treating it as, you know, one agency together and looking at those costs in total. So that's the way we looked at it. Now, there's been some refinement since the June 10th board meeting, that said. And Catherine, do you want to speak a little bit to the refinement that's happened since the initial June 10th presentation where we did those 2 side-by-side comparisons that included the lieutenant position?
Sure. So basically, I don't know that there's been any changes since June 10th in the numbers. The numbers are all the same. It's just how you're looking at it. And the cost savings were across like those positions that were shown versus in separate departments. So there's basically, you know, there's some positions in the administration department now that that used to be in the police department. So the police services specialist is no longer going to be a position, and that's going to be absorbed into the administration department. So when you look at it from that way, you know, you would take away 45,000 or whatever, 50,000 from that budget and put it into the administration budget. And then the lieutenant position, there was savings there, but that was only in the police department. You would see it on this current budget, you know, and this is just the way that it's looking at it. So you're not looking at kind of apples to apples when you're comparing those, because you would have to be looking at the department, you know, the department side by side versus just looking at it as an overall whole organization. So the savings were across the whole organization versus by department. Does that make sense?
I know that you're looking at larger savings, but I'm talking about our administrative staff as it exists now versus our administrative staff as it's going to be. And unless a lieutenant is going to be doing copying or something, which I don't think he is, my calculations again is that it's going to cost almost, well, maybe 45,000 more for the new administrative staff, looking at administrative staff old and new, and getting rid of 3 positions, rolling it into one, seems like it should save money as well as more efficiency. So I don't know how we can go $50,000 more in just the administrative staff. And that's also why I asked does the lieutenant work for the chief? He does. So that's really, it's kind of nonsensical to put it in the same list because it's not the same structure. Then you'd want to put the chief in there as well as in the officers, and we're not doing that. It's really just our administrative staff as it stands now versus what's being proposed, and that's $45,000 more, and I don't know why we need to spend more money.
Can I?
Well, two things. Can I just say, one is that the police specialist position that was referred to earlier is currently in the police budget, and in the new structure, it would be in the admin budget. So it's just moving about $45,000 over from police into the admin side. So it's not like it's new money. And then the other thing I would just say is 70% of our work is supporting the police department. I mean, what we do as admin is support their work in large part. That's the bulk of our, you know, jobs. All of us do varying degrees of it. And so to us, it doesn't make sense to separate it out and just talk about police over here and admin over here when the police department doesn't have a traditional admin staff support like most police departments do. So
And-
we're it, we're the support. So, normally, I can just tell you, Director Deppy, for example, in Marysville, there's a records person, an evidence person, and there's an part-time executive assistant for the police chief. There's a bunch of other administrative assistant positions that are a lot of them are part-time, but they're in the police department budget, right? So they live there, but they're admin staff, and that's where their budget is. Well, this department doesn't have that. We're those people supporting the police department. And so that's why to us, it doesn't make any sense to separate us out and not be thinking of both departments together as a single organization and entity.
Well, I'm talking about the police services specialist. So if you add up general manager, finance and business manager, senior accountant, clerk of the board, administrative assistant, and police services specialist, that costs $394,000. If you add up general manager, finance director, office manager, senior accountant, that's $440,000. So I don't care where you put it in the budget, but it's costing us $45,000 more to do essentially the same thing. And you've rolled 3 positions into one, which theoretically should save money. So it seems to be that there's no reason to spend more money when you should have been able to save money, if anything.
Aren't there savings in the cost of May's accounting so that doesn't show up in salaries or in admin staff because it's a consultant contract. So that is a savings there. You're talking about straight on admin costs. It's not being, I don't know if we're showing I don't remember if the last chart in the first meeting showed the offsets. The chart that compared that had the police structure and the whole district together with staffing changes. Part of that was, I think, to show that even with all the staffing changes, we were not actually incurring greater costs overall. And then there are these other savings around because the captain was so much more expensive. So looking at the staffing changes in toto for the district, that was kind of something I was always concerned about. It can't be, too budget positive. If it's, had to be more or less budget neutral or helpful, sometimes a little bit more, but not extravagantly more. And I think the other part of that is that the savings are not really being captured around the maze, for example. And I kind of feel like we've tried to do a lot of things on the cheap, and it really has hurt us. It's cost us, financially, it's cost us reputationally. It's got a lot of costs sometimes that are quantifiable and others that aren't. And so I personally feel like the structure is definitely worth trying. I also believe in the idea of, a person who is fully committed to their job. It's a full-time, role, and there is a benefit of continuity and kind of just commitment. So that's somewhat intangible, but I do think there's something to that.
So you're saying that we don't need to use Maze anymore?
Maybe just a little bit, but a lot of what they were doing, Catherine can speak to that, but a big part of what they were doing is going away.
So how much are we going to save by not using Maze?
We haven't done that calculation, but the point is that we would try to use them less than we've been using them. That would be the point of having a full-time senior accountant.
That's correct.
But you don't know how much you're going to save.
Well, I think we've only budgeted for 4 hours a month for Maze, so that would be. Sorry, let me just see.
But it's gone up at different times where we've relied on them for different reporting, special reporting throughout the year. So we've had a few pretty big, bills from them for those additional, like mid-year budget, doing that and those kinds of things. So some of those kinds of reporting would be absorbed now by the senior accountant instead of having a consultant do it.
But you don't have a number attached to that.
No, we haven't done that calculation, no.
Because it seemed that would have been good to have. Who's going to be the park administrator?
The office manager, clerk of the board would coordinate the rentals.
Who's going to look after just day-to-day what needs to be done in the park? I mean, it's someone really needs to have an overview and responsibility for the park. That's been a real problem in the past, and I think we've all brought it up. Sylvia brought it up at their first
Mhm.
budget meeting. So who's going to be responsible for making sure that everything is working correctly and they know what needs to be repaired, what state of everything is?
Well, the general manager will have to do those kinds of things and work with the, we have two staff that are not staff, but contractors that I work with directly right now. I've been working directly with them this entire time since I've been here to make sure we are on top of graffiti and broken sprinklers and all those kinds of things. So that kind of thing, the general manager, would continue to do. And I don't, I think it's going to have to be a shared responsibility with the office manager and the general manager working, side by side and giving direction to the two contractors to make sure we stay on top of, those kinds of repairs and some of the park issues that have come up in the past.
Yeah, I would have preferred someone that had the real responsibility for it. So as I mentioned last time, I think the building probably needs some work. And currently we rely on the KCC to do that. And I think it would be better if, because we own the building, that we took control of that and somehow offset it with fees to the KCC. Has that been looked at at all, or are we just going forward with letting KCC take care of the building and assume they're going to do it
No,
correctly?
as I mentioned last time, we haven't started negotiations for a new contract. They have an expired contract. We plan to start working on that in July and discussing terms, and I'll be coming back to closed session to hopefully with Ann's approval to talk about, since it is real estate and real property, to talk about some of the very things that you're bringing up before
Right.
starting to sit down and talk to them. That's a contract agreement issue.
And in acquiring the Prop 68 funds, what do we need to do?
We need to identify a project, which we haven't. Again, we need to turn our attention to that immediately in the new fiscal year and work with the board to see what kind of, once we figure out what's the criteria and what actually, we can do with those monies and make sure that we're in line with the guidelines for the grant, come back with maybe a couple of proposals to the board and see if they're of interest. Or the other option would be to create an ad hoc committee of the board. And if the board wants to identify that project instead, we could certainly try that route as well.
But we don't need to spend money right now.
Well, it's built in, there is a match for the grant, and that is actually built into the budget.
Okay.
Catherine, how much was the match that we built into the budget for that money?
The total amount of the project needs to be like 220,000, and the Prop 68 grant is 177,000, and we have to match like 45,000, I believe. So it's a percentage of your total project. So we can go over 220,000, but they're only going to reimburse you up to 177,000. And we might get a few extra $1,000 for this extra incentive or something, but it wasn't much more than that. So,
Okay.
and just, Chris, I just wanted to address your question too about maize. I just calculated it really quickly, and you'll see about a $60,000 savings. We've budgeted 11,000 for maize for this year, and this last year we were close to 71,000. 44,000 of that was during the time that I had to leave the district. So, continuity of employees is really important. If an employee has to go on leave or absence, having an expensive outside service have to provide that is, it's more expensive. So that $60,000 is reflected in the current budget, since we only budgeted for about 11,000 for maize.
Okay, thank you. There was something that said working remotely increases the IT costs. Why does that?
I don't remember, where was that? I don't remember.
That was in your presentation somewhere.
Just now?
IT costs have gone up both because you've got additional Microsoft 365 users and because of working remotely. Why does working remotely increase the IT cost?
That's a Catherine.
We're reviewing the Rubicon invoices. There are many factors. One of them is, I think historically Rubicon wasn't charging us for the correct number of users, and they found that out and they charged us for the correct number. And now I think we have a little bit too many. So now they're going to be going, they're changing that again for, whenever we lose an employee or an employee comes, that has to get adjusted. So that's one factor. The other factor, there are multiple people that have remote access and that does cost more money. So every person that has access remotely, we're charged a fee. So, I think in the past, they just weren't charging as much because they didn't charge for the total number of employees. And as the pandemic, came on, more people are calling for IT support. And so they realized they needed to be charging for those actual people
Right.
calling. So it's a monthly fee. It's not like we're charged by the hour.
Right.
But
right.
we are analyzing these invoices. So.
Okay. And this is just a small point, but it says that $250,000 loan was on a community center. I thought that money could be used for anything. We use it for the community center, but I don't think it was a dependent, or we didn't have a lien on a community center for that loan. Is that correct? That was money we loaned, we borrowed. We used it for the community center, but it wasn't contingent upon the community center or any kind of legal binding to the community center. Is that right?
Oh, I think it was.
I believe it was.
Yes, it was.
I believe
It
it's
was.
specifically for.
Yeah, we had to outline the project and I think it was for that purpose.
Yeah.
Okay. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, Director Sharaswat is up next.
Oh, thank you. First, I want to say thank you for the directors and community members who are writing in and alerting us to problems or difficulties they see. I appreciate it. I understand why some of it may be shocking for folks, even folks who follow along a lot. And I appreciate the question about everyone's questions about administrative salaries, because it is a bit shocking, but I think that other directors can tell you, and this might be something I might suggest. I hate to suggest more work, but Marty and Catherine, that I know privately we've talked a lot about all the extra that's coming now. And I think maybe we need to outline that a little bit more clearly for folks, that we have these ballooning administrative costs because, like the park, that was neglected for many, many years. And we are catching up on all kinds of requirements and bringing ourselves into better policies and procedures. And that takes a lot of time. And so that is part of the reason that it doesn't seem like we're doing more, because the public really isn't seeing it, but it's all reporting and things that we're doing correctly. And hopefully we'll have this jump, but then it'll be a little bit, it'll increase over time as salaries do, but it won't be these dramatic jumps that you had anticipated before. First question for Chief Gankaz and for Anne. Will it be that a lieutenant can do all the IAs? Presumably if there was an IA against that particular lieutenant, they could not do, but unfortunately we don't want that. But will all the IAs be able to be handled by a new lieutenant?
Yes.
Okay, great. Then my question is, are you intending, I think some folks' hesitancy about the lieutenant position has been that officers have come on and we have kind of followed out of affirmation and affection for the officers. Because we're such a small department, we've moved their positions, their ranks with them, rather than saying, what we fund is a lieutenant position. Unfortunately, now, if you would like to progress to being captain or chief, that's not, and if it's not possible, you're going to have to move to another agency. So I'm wondering if you're intending, or the sergeant positions, that that generally this is kind of our structure and this is what we stick to? Or are you thinking we'll kind of move these positions for individual officers?
I hope I can answer this correctly. I think I understand what you're saying. We don't create positions for employees. The structure is designed for the district and the community.
Okay.
And the structure that I'm hoping to create, that Steve Simpkins and Walt Schuld are trying to create, is that when we're gone, it's a self-running operation, that people are ready to go in place to fulfill the needs of leadership roles when they're ready. We don't create positions to move employees into those positions just because of their names or who they are or whether they're liked or not. If they can't perform the duties, they don't get the job. And I'm very confident in the person that I'm going to appoint lieutenant if the structure is approved. This guy's a 30-year veteran of law enforcement and well respected throughout the ranks, and he's really a jewel of the police department and the community. He's loved by everybody here. And I think it would be a tragedy to lose out on his mentorship with the remaining younger ranks and have him move on. So we need to value what we have when we have it. But if he chooses not to take that rank, I would go outside the organization to find somebody qualified.
Okay, I think that's good.
I would just add to that, that the general manager doesn't support creating a structure that fits people. She supports creating a structure that fits the district, and then you find the right people to fit those positions. So I wouldn't be at all supportive of morphing the structure to, you know, for different people that are already in the organization. So
I know. I think the board has had a hand in that in the past, as well as the PD in kind of doing that. And I understand why it happens. You have you like people. It's difficult to find people, and so sometimes you bend a little bit. But I think, like you're saying, I think we're now looking right at creating a structure that we hope is sustainable, and also, even if that unfortunately means hiring more often than we would like to, if someone needs to move up the rank.
Yeah, if we have an open sergeant's rank, and if we don't have anybody qualified within the organization to fit that rank, we'll go outside the organization to find someone qualified to do it.
Okay, great. My one other concern is, I would say, and I totally understand why you did it, that the 200,000 overtime is a bit shy. So as a board member, and we can talk about this, is that I would probably like to see it moved back down to 100,000 and absolutely reevaluate in mid-year or a little before, and just because it helps keep, not because we don't understand that it's maybe very necessary and the value of it, but that it also helps the board members keep our eye on what we're doing in the budgeting. So that would be my one suggestion, and it's clearly not meant to be punitive nor meant to be something that lasts the whole year, because I want to absolutely examine it again and see where we are and see how hiring's going and everything for you.
it's not going well, but.
Yeah, I completely understand. We're trying to find the best people we can to fill the positions without compromising integrity and professionalism. And I can assure you that every police department in the United States, in fact, NBC News ran an article just the other day about the 46% increase in retirements and the 18% increase in resignations for law enforcement across the country. It is extraordinarily difficult to find qualified people willing to do the job. I was recently at a county chiefs meeting last week with the sheriff's department, the heads of the other organizations in Contra Costa County, and every single one of them was asking, where do we go to get qualified employees to come do the job? It's very difficult. So the thought process behind increasing the overtime budget is, we know we're going to breach the top. I mean, right now, as I look at the schedule on my monitor above me, we have officers overlapping each other each week just to make the ends meet right now. So, and the time that it takes to find an applicant, get them through the background process, get them up on their own feet and running takes a significant amount of time. Minimum time turnaround for employing a police officer could be anywhere from 4 months to 6 months. It's a lengthy process that they have to go through, and I'm not willing to compromise that just to fill a suit or fill a uniform. I want the right people for the district that are going to do the best job.
Oh, no, absolutely. And I'm not saying that we're all on the same page. I think we all understand the need for overtime, understand how it can be beneficial, but we don't want to burn anybody out.
Sure.
And maybe, and I mean, maybe if we think we're going to decrease salary until mid-year budget review, just a little bit, that was my only suggestion. And, and we want it to reflect what is necessary. That's not one. Okay, I'm done.
Okay, I will move to attendees shortly. I just want to say that for myself, regarding some of the park deferred maintenance, and General Manager Brown referred to things that relate to fire safety, and another common deferred maintenance item that has come up over the last 2 weeks have been leaking, not even just the last 2 weeks, even before that, leaking irrigation lines, which of course is a water shortage issue. So really on both ends, fire and flood, if you will, there's a lot of maintenance to be done. So I appreciate the fact that that's going to get some attention. I have no other comments that haven't already been addressed or covered. I'm looking to see if there's anyone in the audience who has anything they wish to comment on. Okay. I see Delk's hand is up. So hold on one second. Delk, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hi, hey, Stephen Stelk. The Bayview Fund is currently a little over $300,000. Thank you for clarifying that it will be transferred to the Waste Management Fund. Unassigned reserves have been divided into 4 funds: General Reserve, Capital Projects, Waste Management, and Landscape Lighting. It seems there are assigned funds in the unassigned fund, which does not make sense. Don't the last 3 meet the GASB 54 criteria for assigned? That is, funds that are quote.
Oh, Delk, sorry, hold on a second. Unmute yourself again. There.
Where
Okay.
should I start?
You said it seems that do these funds meet the
Okay,
GASB criteria?
let me start that. All right. Don't the last 3 meet the GASB 54 criteria for assigned? That is, funds that are, quote, intended to be used for specific purposes, but are not either restricted or committed. But I assume now that they are in the unassigned fund so that they can be used for any purpose when needed. I think that pending the outcome of Zolli, franchise revenue should still be considered restricted, as it has been since 2013. I assume legal counsel has advised the district. The projection for waste management for the next year are expenditures of $7,000 for trash cans, $66,400 for staff time, with revenue at $64,700, a deficit of $10,070. Based on these numbers, at the end of next year, the fund would be at $298,423. However, the amount shown in the budget is $228,719, about $70,000 less. So something is wrong. I calculated that the office staff time allocated to waste management is $55,000. So that would mean that the cost for contractors would be $11,000. Marty, you told me last year that last year's waste recycling expense was for Bill Driscoll to empty park trash cans. Bayview does that. So I assume you meant the 2 Arlington Calusa cans, but that is only at $2,400 a year. My final question is the allocated 14 hours per week for office staff time considered routine as opposed to extra time needed next year in connection with the expiration of the Bayview contract in 14 months? Thank you.
I think General Manager Brown could potentially, could potentially answer that part of that question, the last part of it, which I believe the answer to that is, it is more than routine. It is designed to account for the extra time that's going to be spent because we are going to be entering a period of negotiation. I also want to say that I do believe there was money allocated for Bill Driscoll to be emptying the cans because they were getting filled at a very fast rate during a time when Bayview did not come to empty them out at the park. So I believe that there was actually some funds. No? Oh, okay. Sorry. I thought there were some extra funds for additional. I thought Bill Driscoll was making some extra runs because there was some things that were overfilled, but
He was making runs for the 2 on Arlington and the 1 on Calusa because they were getting filled up on Saturday after Bayview would have emptied them on Friday.
that's what I meant. It wasn't related to the park. It was related to extra runs.
Yeah.
Because there was a problem with the schedule and with it being overflowing. So that is accurate. And my understanding around the extra staff, or the way staff time is allocated, and Marty, you can just confirm or correct me that it is related to the fact that we are going into heavy negotiation. And I see Catherine's hand is up too.
Yeah, that is, I mean, Catherine, I was just waiting for direction whether you want me to answer questions from the public. So that's why I wasn't jumping in.
Yeah.
So if you want us to do that, we can. Yes, the
Just-
increase.
I mean, I think I've answered the question and you can tell
Yeah.
me if I'm wrong.
That is correct. And Delk had other questions too. And I think Catherine is probably better prepared to answer some of those if you want to go there.
If you have anything you can add, Catherine, to clarify any of the questions or numbers, feel free.
Thank you, Delk, for your questions. And there is you're correct. There is a mistake on the waste management fund for the projected 6/30/2022. We need to add back the revenue for that year. So we will correct that before the final version is completed. And I think the other question that you had, this is all pretty much done by hand. Eventually, our accounting software will have the capacity to, help us with this, and it'll be tracked within the accounting software. But right now, these are all kind of broken up by hand. So, so thank you for pointing that out. And I think the other question you had was about the unassigned reserve, and that number, or those numbers. We're going from unassigned reserve because we only had basically the general fund to having all these funds now. So basically the unassigned reserve is being split up into the funds and they're designated to those funds. However, I believe with board direction, we can still move monies around if they needed to. So, the landscape and lighting district funds are, just specific to that. But if say you needed to use something else for a project, if the board directs you to do that, then you can move money from one fund. Is that how you understand it, Marty?
Yes, it is. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So that I think that it's just the way I have to think about how to maybe not have that arrow and on that spreadsheet. So does that answer your question, Delk?
Yes.
Okay.
I think
Okay.
I'm probably muted.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to go to, hold on one second. Jim Watt, Jim, you should be able to unmute yourself and speak.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good evening. Well, I have scripted my comments out, so hopefully I can stay within the 3-minute time frame. I can assure you if I could speak as fast as Marty Brown, I'd have no problem, but I'm not that qualified. So to begin, I have previously emailed the board with some of my concerns about the assumptions in the proposed 21-22 budget. With just 3 minutes to talk, I cannot reiterate all of those concerns or Marty's comments to them, but would like to discuss and expand upon 3 major ones and then cover the invisible elephant in the room that has been completely overlooked in the budget, specifically the cost of relocating from the public safety building while it is being brought up to seismic safety codes. The first budget concern is the police salary schedule, which assumes we will be staffed with 9 officers starting 2 days from now, maybe 1 day from now, when today we only have 6 officers. It then assumes our overtime pay for the next year will hit $200,000, significantly more than we have ever experienced. The incongruity of these 2 assumptions should be of obvious concern to the board. Second, the staffing plan to add 3 new officers indicates that 2 of the 3 officers will be classic officers, which means they started their police service before 1/1/2013. A classic officer is far more expensive than officers who start police work after 1/1/13 for 2 reasons. First, they are entitled to significant higher pension costs called PERS contributions. And am I still on?
Yes.
Oh, and incentive pay that can easily exceed $20,000 a year more than a non-classic officer. Second, because classic officers have joined police work before 2013, they will be older, in all likelihood in their 40s or even older, and therefore eligible for Kensington's generous pension benefits starting at age 50. Since Kensington, unlike many communities, pays the health care benefits of retirees to include dependents, these costs can exceed $20,000 a year, and these costs can exceed $20,000 a year. So if the officer retires at age 50 and lives to age 80, Kensington taxpayers could be stuck with $600,000 in lifetime medical costs. The third concern I'll mention is the budget's significant increase in staff costs and the possibility that this could go even higher. The proposed budget would convert several part-time employee jobs to full-time, creating a total payroll and benefits cost of $442,000, based upon the general manager and finance director working only 30 and 20 hours a week, respectively. This $442,000 is $182,000 more than the projected staff costs for the current fiscal year, and does not include the added costs of officer space to support these full-time workers. But the $442,000 is just the base cost and is likely to go up much higher because it assumes that Marty will
Bill,
work
I'm
30
sorry.
hours and
Jim,
Kathy 20 hours.
You're at your time. You want to just wrap up with the elephant in the room?
Okay, the elephant in the room. This budget virtually ignores what is likely to become one of the biggest cost items the district has ever had to budget for, namely the need to reallocate the public safety building so the necessary seismic upgrades can be completed. This relocation cost during reconstruction of the PSB could easily exceed $1 million, yet indications are that the district probably has about $900,000 available for cash reserves. The cost of relocating both police and staff to the potentially unusable building a potentially unusable building needs to be fully understood and appreciated, and appropriate details studied before final budget is appropriated. As I have recommended to the board by email, this can be easily accomplished by proceeding in the same manner as that used by the fire district, which adopted a resolution approving a preliminary fire district budget for the fiscal year 21-22 on the condition that a final budget would be adopted by the statutory required date of October 1, 2021.
All right, Jim, you're a little over now. So I think we got the main points.
Well, you didn't, but okay.
Okay. I just want to comment a little bit because we have been, paying attention to comments from not just Mr. Watt, but others. And some of them have been answered before, and I'm going to actually ask General Manager Mary Brown, although she's already done this several times, to do it again in specific, regard to these things. But it was mentioned beforehand that the budgeting of classic officers is a conservative way to budget. It doesn't mean we're going to be hiring classic officers. It is just actually a conservative way to budget. I also want to say that General Manager Brown has answered the question many, many times about the allocation of funds for the moving to the, relocation. I think I appreciate not throwing darts at, in the dark at numbers, and we don't even have a location yet. So I think we need to, and what we're doing is fairly along the lines you say, for a permanent budget versus budget revisions. Personally, to me, it's a little bit of semantics. So I wanted to have an opportunity to respond to some of this because I don't want you to think that we haven't been reading your emails. We haven't been responsive. I think we've been, extremely cognizant of what you've been talking about. I will ask General Manager Brown to address anything she wishes to in your comments, but in particular, there was something I wanted you to talk about. Gosh, I can't think. It'll come to me. But if you would like to go ahead and just comment on anything directly, please, I want to give you the opportunity.
Well, I just would say, to reiterate the part about the classic employees, we don't, typical public sector budgeting for employees is still done where you budget for classic employees regardless of what department it is, because if you have a CalPERS organization, because you don't know who you'll be hiring. And so the fiscally conservative thing to do is to actually budget for classic employees in a CalPERS organization across any departments for that matter. It's not just police, so that you are, careful and you've budgeted for the most expensive employees, as you've indicated, Jim. That is that, classic CalPERS employees are more expensive than PEPRA. I should know. I used to be classic. Now I'm PEPRA if I wasn't a CalPERS organization. So that is how it works. But this is how public sector budgets. So we're just doing it exactly the same way in every public sector agency I've ever worked in. So I would just say that. The rest of it, I feel like we really covered a lot of ground in the community workshop, and it was a good 2-hour iterative discussion back and forth. And I feel like I've really, addressed to the best of my ability, my professional opinion around a number of things that you've raised. Passing a preliminary budget versus doing a budget now that you do a budget amendment to in 3 months or 6 months, to me that it really is just a discretionary decision, actually. If another district or another agency wants to do a preliminary budget and follow the county standard, which is to adopt their budgets in the fall, and the county keeps all of our money, as everybody knows, that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is to just adopt your budget and make amendments and adjustments as necessary if need be. I can tell you, when we were in bankruptcy in Vallejo, the budget was adjusted 16 times in one fiscal year. We adopted a budget, but before June 30th, but that first year of bankruptcy was multiple budget. It wasn't a preliminary budget. It was just coming back and making adjustments as actuals were changing constantly. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. There isn't just one way to do it. And I'm just proposing it to the board. If the board wants to turn this into a preliminary budget, instead, we could do that. I don't really think it makes a difference, quite honestly, because we are going to have to make an adjustment, an amendment, one way or the other, because we will get an estimate for relocation of the police department and KPPCSD. And when we have that at that time, we will be having to make some sort of an amendment or adjustment to the budget, regardless of whether we call it preliminary or the budget. So other than that, I mean, I feel like I've addressed, most of the other questions that Jim has had here and at the last workshop.
Okay, I have other members of the public that want to speak, so I'm going to, but I see that Director Sharis-Watt's hand is up, as well as Catherine Corsack. So if this relates to the current conversation, I want to give you the opportunity to speak, and then we'll go back to the public. Director Sharis-Watt, you want to go first?
Oh, it was just to have Marty just talk about how she controls hours. That would be helpful, maybe for just a quick mention anyway, because in the past, we as board members had a really hard time. We had employees exceed hours, and then we found that there was no internal controls really for doing that, or very few. And now we know that the board doesn't control that. We know you do. And I know sometimes we would have loved Catherine to work more hours, and she couldn't. So, but maybe you can tell us how you do that.
Well, I mean, it is, I'm not going to deny that it's challenging when everybody is working remotely, almost entirely, of the administrative staff. That's how it has been, other than the administrative assistant and myself 2 days a week being in the office. So it is challenging, but I do sign off on all of the timesheets for the administrative staff. And so obviously I'm looking at their hours, and I can tell you, we don't go over the hours that are in the budget and that were approved by the board. We just don't do that. And you can't do that. I don't know. I don't know how else to say it. I can't imagine I can't imagine just going over budget and letting people, I rely on the staff to say, Marty, if you're going to give me this assignment, I can't do it in my 20 hours. So then I did make a decision, and usually it's, okay, meter this out. Let's do it the following week and fit it into those 20 hours. We do have conversations from time to time about workload issues. And I have told the staff, if there's trouble staying within the hours that have been approved by the board, then we need to have a conversation about it, and I'll help you prioritize your work accordingly. So other than that, for the most part, the hourly paid staff have been pretty good about not only staying in their hours, but prioritizing their time and metering out, things for the future. I do the same thing. I know, what Catherine's working on or Linnell's working on. And I try to say, or the chief, I'm giving you the heads up. I'm asking for this assignment that I want, completed in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, something like related to the budget recently. And I'm metering it out, hoping, the idea is that they're prioritizing their time and they're seeing, okay, I have 3 weeks to do this and fit it into my 20 hours a week. And then if that doesn't happen, then we talk about it and we prioritize. So that's kind of how we work that. In terms of my time, I do what I need to do my job, quite frankly. And so when I feel like, I track my hours, but when I get to a place sometimes where I'm over in a week, I don't mark over on my timesheet the next week. I might work a little bit less to make up in the 2 weeks, to make up 60 hours in 2 weeks. So I think of it more as a 2-week block, because it varies from week to week. It's too hard to stick to 9 to 3:30, Monday through Friday. It's not possible. So I kind of more think of my time in a 2-week block for the timesheet, like that, and kind of flex my time if necessary. But it's usually more than 30 hours a week, but I don't charge you for it. So that's another conversation. You're on mute, Sylvia and Rochelle. You're both were on mute. So
Is there anything else that you wanted to add, Catherine, right now?
I just wanted to add just one of Jim's comments was, Jim Watt's comments was that the overtime, this about overtime, and he said that it was the 200,000 is more than we've ever had. And I just wanted to point to in 1920, there were 6 full year employees, full police employees, and 2 that were partial. So 2 employees that were maybe there for a few months of the year. And the overtime that year was close to 200. It was 187,000. So I just wanted him to have that for background
In
because
1920,
in
that was-
1920, in 2019-20, that's how much overtime
worth
was.
a
And
lot
the
more than
main,
today.
we were at 6 employees, and right now we're at 6 employees. So that's why I just want to give you a sense of where we're at and where we're going. And
All right, let me go back to the public as Dave Spath has been patiently waiting. And Dave, you can unmute yourself now.
Am I unmuted, Sylvia?
You are.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate all the feedback and the willingness to answer the questions. I also appreciate Chief Gancast's explanation on the lieutenant's position. However, at the same time, I am worried about the fact that the low officer corps number is going to have a particular impact on workload, particularly now that you have a traffic safety unit that you've created. And I'm presuming that Officer Harms, who is probably instrumental in putting that together, is now going to be the lieutenant. And so I hope that that he will be doing as much as he would have done as an officer in putting this all together and implementing it. Because as of right now, we're just 4 officers in a sense available. When now you have a new lieutenant and the chief, it's going to be a significant workload imposition on the remaining officers. So something worth thinking about. Secondly, the board does have to make a decision on whether or not it wants to proceed with food waste collection. And I know Vice President Natoli is fully aware of this, and she was involved a lot in this. But by the first of the year, the district either has to decide whether it wants to seek a waiver or implement the regulations. And it's not clear to me whether there is or is not strong sentiment in this community to have food waste. And my sense is, after the previous survey that was done, that there probably is strong sentiment to implement the regulations. And that will have a fairly significant cost implication to the district, probably coming out of the Waste Management Fund, which will impose a cost on the administration as well. Now, I know Marty has received an email to that effect from me, and she's responded back, which I appreciate, indicating that that will be taken up shortly. But it is important to decide one way or the other before the first of the year. So thank you again for taking the time to listen and respond.
I just wanted to say that I think that the concern that a bunch of folks had around the staffing, I think I want to just reiterate what Chief Gancas said, which is that these are not exclusive sort of behind the desk officers. They are working officers who will be on patrol. I believe the chief is even patrolling at times. And so this is a working department, and that is one of the characteristics of it. And I think that people who haven't succeeded here expected something different. And I think folks who have come here have come with their eyes wide open as to what we expect and what we need based on our size. So I just wanted to make that comment. I'm going to now allow Julie Stein to talk. And again, please limit to 3 minutes. We have other items I want to make sure we get to. So I'm going to have Julie. I don't see anyone else with their hands up. So Julie will be the last person unless anyone else raises their hand. You should be able to speak, Julie. Let me see. Just unmute yourself.
Thanks, Sylvia. And I will try to be as brief as possible. I just wanted to, so I really do want to thank you, GM Brown, for your very professional presentation, and Ms. Corsack and Chief Gancas. I think that this is really quite educational for the public, whether they agree with your figures or not. At least it's very programmatically educational. I just wanted to echo Mr. Watt's concern about the elephant in the room. I do understand that I think you need to pass a budget tonight. And I do take, I hear what you're saying, GM Brown, about the budget can always be modified. But I do hope that you think through the relocation of the police department very seriously before you get too deeply into your spending. The way I read this budget, and I could be wrong, but it looks like you're using most of your revenue to pay expenses this year up to about a half a month balance. So you're really going to be dipping into your reserves to fund the movement of the police department. And presumably you keep an operating reserve. So I'm thinking this leaves you about, I don't know, $1.5 million for moving the police department. And I keep going back to your March 2021 presentation where you did the preliminary financial analysis, option B, of moving out of the public safety building to a separate facility. And the cost of tenant improvements range from $375,000 to $2 to $3 million. And the $2 to $3 million figure was if you have everything up to code and seismically sound. It's hard for me to imagine that you could renovate a space for a police department without having everything up to code and seismically sound. So I just want to echo that concern. I'm not looking for any answers to any questions right now, but just to express my concern. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so we are now done with the public comment portion, and I think we're ready to proceed unless there is any uncertainty at this point. And I would appreciate if somebody else might be willing to make the motion because I am having trouble getting to the proper place in my screen and 138 pages of presentation.
Just trying to be thorough.
Yes, I appreciate that. Well, I'm certainly happy to make the motion that the board consider, that the board approve the fiscal year budget as it's been presented.
I'd like to make a friendly amendment that we alter the overtime category. I don't have it in front of me, which is why I hesitated, back to 120,000, and that we make the alterations mentioned. Is it category 630, Catherine, or 6? Is that the correct? That reflect accurately the waste figures.
So overtime is account 506.
506.
Yeah, and then
120,000, and then I believe it was 630. Is that the category that you said, or 603?
There is no 630.
Related to the waste revenue.
Waste revenue, sorry.
So waste revenue is correct. It's in the franchise fees gross. It was just on the liabilities and reserve and fund balance page that we need to reflect that number on that spreadsheet. So it's correct in the budget. It's just it wasn't reflected on this one sheet. So
I have a question about that's related to, if I can, for discussion, related to Director Sharris's Watt amendment, and that relates to the salaries, as Mr. Watt pointed out. You know, assume you fund them all the way, you fund the 9 officers starting tomorrow, 2 days from now, rather. And we know that there's nobody going to be in that position. So is just for the purposes of budgeting, and is there some reason why we can't not budget for the salary for those for the full year for, like, 1 officer? Would that help with moving some of that money to overtime, or at least being more accurate in the budget, or does it? I'm just curious as to how to address that issue.
I don't object to that if that is a
I
better way.
mean, we certainly could start the salaries for the 3 additional vacant positions later in the fiscal year if you would prefer. We could do the calculations for that and change that to say, a September 1 or October 1 start date. I think our thought was, we're working as hard as we can, and we have been prior to, because there's been vacancies for a while, right? And we're working as quickly as possible to try to fill them. And so I think our thought was we didn't want to say, oh, we can't hire somebody because we're starting their salary October 1 or something like that. And it is a balanced budget, and then, is a significant reserve. And I mean, the one thing I think I want to remind people of is if the money doesn't get spent, it doesn't burn a hole in our pocket. It just, we can move it around at the mid-year budget at another time. It's a budget.
I guess it doesn't address your concern, Director Sherris-Watt, even though we have the money to cover that. You're just concerned that it's just a high overtime number and you want to see it down and reconsidered later.
I just want, as a board member, I want to keep our eye on it, but I'm happy to, I understand and I know it's a balanced budget. I do like when we come in, as close as possible. So I would never want you to feel that oh, we can't hire because the board hasn't, approved these monies until.
I think what I would recommend, my recommendation actually would be to leave it as is, drop the number to 120,000, which was the number that was in the June 10th presentation. And if at the mid-year budget, we're getting really close, we'll just come back and say, it's out of our hands. We're running up against, the 120,000. And we probably will have salary savings from not hiring July 1 and the ability to move around and just address it at the mid-year budget. I would just suggest we do it that way and drop the number to 120,000 if you're okay with that, Director Sherris-Watt.
That would be fine with me. I totally, not to be difficult.
Not at all.
No, it's totally fine. No,
okay.
it's not a problem.
So are there any other modifications that anyone else wishes to propose at this time? Okay, so I will restate the motion that we adopt the budget as presented to us with the amendment of a reduction in the overtime line to 120,000 from 200,000. That is the really only change to the budget, as Catherine has pointed out. The other change is not related to the budget. Is there a second for the adoption of the budget with the amendment?
Oh,
I'll second that.
Great. I guess the clerk can now call the roll, please.
You're on
Director
mute.
Steffi,
Yes.
Vice President Natoli,
You're on mute, Vice President Natoli.
Yes.
Director Sherris-Watts,
yes.
and President Hassai.
Yes. So we have a budget adopted 4-0 by the board. And again, as you've heard quite a few times, a really big thank you to all the staff, Catherine, the chief, Marty, and anyone behind the scenes who's helped with this, and to all the board directors and the public who have really spent the last month deep in numbers. So it feels like we should just wrap up and go home now because that's pretty extensive, but we do not have that luxury. I am going to my agenda here. And
I know it feels like a pause point, but so I'll just say, thank you to all of our staff that you have been so tremendous. Linnell, Catherine, Ann, Mike, Marty, I mean, just above and beyond. And we know what incredible pressure we all feel. It's been a really hard couple of years. So thank you, for showing up, for listening and responding. And, and you're dealing with lots of people with lots of history. And so thank you very much. We really appreciate your professionalism and your commitment to the district, because I think all of us, even if when we disagree on points, can absolutely feel. And I will say this is, it's a huge change. It's a sea change for the organization to feel people that are committed to improving our district. So, and for our residents. So thank you.
Yeah. And I think that some of the items that were brought up today continue to show how important it is to kind of have this consistent, dedicated staff around things like the park maintenance issues and the KCC contract issue and the waste management things. So these are things we have to keep our eyes on. So when folks are saying, well, we didn't add programs, well, we need to do what we already have to do and do it right and do it better. And so, I agree with Director Shara-Swat. Thank you. So the next item on our agenda is the board vacancy application process and a potential appointment. And as folks may recall, Director Madavi resigned, and we have until July 12th to make an appointment. And we agreed that based on we would take a look today at today's meeting as what was going on with the process and talk about that. And so, I personally, when we saw that we have only received one application, felt like it made sense to consider that application today. And so, Marty wrote up a staff report, also with lots of information about the timeline, the statutory requirements, which I think also argue for proceeding in this way. And the application we received was from Mike Logan to fill the open vacancy. And General Manager Brown, if you want to add any more to that, otherwise I think we could sort of just begin a discussion of that suggestion.
No, I think I'd just like to turn it over to the board. I think you covered it pretty well, actually. So your options.
So we, everyone received the application. It's pretty straightforward. There are no other applicants. So, I was hoping that we could take action on that application and appointment this evening. If certainly open to discussion of this with my fellow board members. Director Shara-Swat. Oh, I see. Hold on. General Counsel Ann Danforth has her hand up, so I'm going to let her go first.
I just wanted to make sure that we allowed for public comment before the board came to any decision on whether to proceed.
Okay. Can we have a discussion first, or do you want me to take public comment first?
Oh, no, you can absolutely have a discussion first.
Okay. Director Shara-Swat.
I am happy to speak up on behalf of Mike Logan. Mr. Logan worked on the Finance Committee for 3 years prior to 2021. And he has been interested in the affairs and the financial affairs of the KPPCSD for a long time. And I think he adds a vital benefit, would add a vital benefit to our board. Okay. Any other board members want to have any discussion or make any comment before we go to the public comment? Okay. I will also just say that I was pleased to see that that Mr. Logan made an application. I know him to also have been someone interested in the district for quite some time, and having served on the Finance Committee as well. I'll see if there are any attendees who have raised their hands. I do not see any. Oh, no, I see Delk. Delk, you should be able to unmute yourself. Go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
All right. I unmuted myself and then it said the host muted me, so I tried again. So what do you got against me? Sorry about that. What would you have done if you had a party and you invited people to it and Mike Logan was the only one who came? Thank you, Mike. We really appreciate that.
I'd have to wonder why no one wanted to come to my party, I guess. Disable talking. Okay, so there are no other public comments. Unless Delk is asking to talk again, which I'm not supposed to let you do.
I'm trying to lower my hand.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Okay. So we have before us the application of Mike Logan. I'd like to make a motion that the board accept this application and in fact appoint Mike Logan to fill the term of Director Modavi, which would mean that he would be a director through 2022. That's when the term ends.
I'll second that motion.
Thank you. The clerk please call the roll for us.
Director Deppie.
I too want to thank Mike for applying, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it. So, yes.
Vice President Natoli.
I enthusiastically accept Mike's application and appreciate it very much. And he's been very active in following the district and very active on the finance committee too. And I thank him very much for his application.
Say yes in there.
I said I enthusiastically accepted.
Appoint, you need to appoint.
Director Sheriff Watts
Yes.
and President Hassai.
Yes. So on behalf of the board and the residents of Kensington, I would like to welcome Mike Logan to the board. General Counsel Danforth, I assume that we will do a swearing in, a public swearing in next meeting. And he can have an orientation of matters he needs to be brought up to speed on prior to that. So let's tune in for a swearing in next meeting, and I will promote Mike if he would like to just say a few words. He doesn't have to, he can just say a few words. I'm going to find him. I'm pretty sure he's in the meeting. Let's see. There he is. I'm going to, get you used to talking. All right, Mike, you can unmute yourself.
Okay, I was wondering how I was going to get the unmute button because I was looking all over for it on this. But as the one comment says, is you always have to wonder when you're the only person who attends a party per se. I was a little shocked when I was the only applicant because I think there are any number of good citizens here who could have applied and would certainly do a very good job also. So. But I'm honored that you voted me in.
Well, thank you, and it's an affirmation of your qualities and your knowledge. So thanks for applying, and we look forward to serving with you shortly. And enjoy the rest of your evening. We still have work to do.
Yeah.
Okay, I just put Mike back in the audience, and we have one more item, I believe, before we will take comment for prior to our closed session, and that is an updated master fee schedule for the KPPCSD rental facilities. I will say that although we had hoped to come back with a policy that addressed and specifically the K groups, we do not have that available tonight. We will still bring that back to the board. And right now we're going to look at a slightly revised master schedule, which again was done with considerable research into other facilities like ours, from other towns. And I'll let General Manager Brown just reintroduce this.
Thank you, President Hassai. Yes, as President Hassai mentioned, we will return in August at the August board meeting with some proposals for the K groups and other important groups that may not start with a K, but are important to consider for some a different fee structure than this one. This is really intended for individual public events like weddings and memorial services and things like that overall. And the other thing that we would come back and address is also that is not addressed here tonight, but we talked about was the barbecues and revisiting whether or not those should remain in the park or should just some remain, et cetera. So those two things will come back in August, hopefully with that's the plan, with a recommendation to the board. With that, I'm just going to jump into the proposed rates. As you recall, probably from the last regular board meeting, we brought this forward, and I think everybody agreed it needed a little bit more work and massaging. And so I met with President Hassai and Director Sheris-Watt to go over the proposed rates and just kind of take a deeper dive, if you will, and looking at these rates versus the current rates versus the jurisdictions that were looked at that had some similar facilities. And those included El Cerrito, Berkeley, Albany, and Richmond. And for the most part, as well as tennis courts. So I think rather than going through everything line by line, I would just want to, I think I just want to highlight, if I could, some of the bigger change really was this idea that we didn't have, which is this the very first line item under the proposed rates in attachment 1, which is, you know, what if somebody wants to rent the entire facility that includes, you know, the large community center room, the 3 meeting rooms, the kitchen, and of course the grassy lawn out in front that the folding doors open up to. And, you know, thinking that there's probably people that would want access and a level of control during their event over the entire facility. And so we didn't have a single ballpark number for that before. So we added that to this fee schedule. In a few cases lowered the residential fee schedule a little bit from what they were before. Some of the other ones, like just the hall itself, from what was proposed in the prior board meeting. I think those were the main differences that we had from last time. And we also made some adjustments to the, I think to the picnic area rental fees as well. And I don't know if President Hassai or Director Sheris-Watt have anything they want to add to that. I mean, that's really, I think those were the big changes that we came up with from the last time. I don't really have anything more to add beyond that. Or if there's questions, more questions. And
just trying to be responsive to some of the things that were raised by citizens during that first meeting. Any comments from directors?
I will make one comment. I mean, we looked at this fee schedule and we're not trying to price out community members or make it unaffordable, but the fact is we also we do want to encourage some revenue from the building. My only question to the board is, thinking about it today, and so I don't want to spring this, but is there any reason that we would want to, that folks might want to rent the main hall only for less than the 4 hours? That was the only thing I thought about. Is there any reason that someone would want just that main room for like a lecture for 2 hours or something? Do we want? That would be the only flexibility, because 4 hours, someone was saying, you know, the cost would be prohibitive. And we've allowed you to rent the smaller rooms, but I just wanted to make sure that we were not leaving out a group.
Interesting. I'm trying to go back to the thing.
So I think one comment I would just make about that is just that to think about is, you know, the cost of staff monitoring and cleanup afterwards, and wanting to make sure that, I think that there's a time frame that makes it cost effective, you know, because somebody's got to go back, check the facility, and then do any cleanup if it wasn't done properly. And an hour or two, I just think that the cost versus a 4-hour function in terms of how we pay for and the cost sort of time benefit for that additional contract staff person would probably, you know, just might not come out as financially beneficial, I guess, for the district is what I'm saying. That's the only thing that I can think of that would be, that is a question in my mind, I guess.
I was only thinking of like, is there the possibility that someone wants to host some kind of lecture, something that is very low user, not, you know, not a dance, not a something that would just involve the main room for space purposes. And I just didn't want to leave something out like that, that we're envisioning certain kinds of functions and
Right.
that we're missing a community. I mean,
It's a good point. I could imagine, you know, you have an hour lecture, you need 30 minutes to, you know, set up and maybe 30 minutes to break down. So you have a 2 hour, and maybe even if you add a little bit more, 4 hours may be too much. I think we have to just, maybe what we could do is just sort of go ahead and I think people will ask if they, you know, if they wanted it for 2 hours, they might say, can we use it for 2 hours? And maybe it's a matter of just seeing how it goes for the next 6 months to a year and keeping track of things. Like we had, you know, a lot of requests for less than 4 hours. And I think the staff has to come back to us and say, okay, this isn't working. It's, you know, I've noticed. I mean, I don't know, Marty, what you think, if we can adjust or we just kind of keep track of things.
Well, I think, you know, the other thing to consider is that in most jurisdictions, you have a waiver policy or an adjustment policy that isn't just like what we've been talking about, coming back with the K groups and an adjustment for a list of groups of, groups that are already out and identified, but having a whole policy around how are you going to make exceptions or reductions or waivers to your current policy. We haven't really talked about that because there's so many exceptions, if you think about it, or there could be, that having a policy in place, you know, keeping your fee structure pretty firm, but then a policy with a set of guidelines and criteria under which somebody would be, a group would be considered for certain exceptions to the rule. That's pretty standard, and we could certainly take a look at developing maybe that. I mean, Marysville had one for special events. We had a list of criteria that if you met XYZ, you're a nonprofit, you know, there were certain things, then there could be a discretionary decision could be made.
I would be fine with that. And I think, as you pointed out, like part of it is what type of event it is. If the event is not a heavy cleanup and it's just a lecture and it's about moving tables or chairs only, that could be an exception. So I would be okay with that idea.
okay, great. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we're.
So that maybe could be part of what comes back before the board in August.
Yeah, we could try to do that. Yeah.
Okay. Any other board comments? Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and then ask for public comment. Mabry Benson, you should be able to unmute yourself, Mabry.
Oh, okay. I wasn't able to make this comment at the last meeting because I couldn't, it just wouldn't unmute. And I did write to all the board members and the general manager. My concern was there was nothing taken into account for free use, particularly by the youth groups, possibly other K groups. And we have worked over decades to provide this so there's a place for our kids to do something. And I think that's a grave neglect. And but it sounds like you're now talking about that issue. But I think it's just a poor idea to be establishing a fee structure. There's a lot of policies you need to work out and discuss, and I think it's just bad form, poor policy to be establishing a fee structure when you don't have much of a concept of the policies that must be decided upon. A number of the issues that were brought up tonight. I just think, and as far as the budget, I don't see the rush to adopt this fee structure. You could wait a couple of months. I guess the other thing I would like to see is some prioritization for the community. I'd hate to have a wedding, book the whole thing a year in advance, and that blocks out possible community use anyway, that's another policy issue about how much ahead of time these things. There's too many issues to just adopt a fee policy before you've worked out the myriad policies that need to be addressed. That's my 2 bits.
Thank you. Okay. I just want to reiterate that that came up at the very first discussion of this, and we did not, I'm sorry that we were being neglectful. We in fact were not. We just have not been able to get, to complete it, but it has been top of mind since this was first proposed. Any other public comment? No, and I see Director Sharis Watt has her hand up still, unless that's from before, Rachel. No. Okay, so I'll lower it down.
I was just going to say, yeah, again, to reiterate, we are absolutely going to do a policy that takes into account the history and the involvement and the commitment to Kensington and to the Youth Hut Community Center that all the K groups and the other non-K but equally important groups have brought to the building. So that will, like Marty said, come up in August. The only, I think it's important for us to have a fee schedule. The reason we kind of pushed it was that lots of folks are clamoring to get reservations now, and we wanted it to take effect July 1st with our fiscal year, so that if new reservations were going to be allowed, they were going to reflect this new fee schedule. We did have a fee schedule before. It was more complicated. You may not have seen it, but it existed. More complicated, a little dated. And this one is, I think, a whole lot clearer. Marty and Catherine have put a lot of work into this and comparison of different things. The one thing I would say that maybe I'm missing it, Marty, and we didn't talk about it, is about how long we're going to. We know we're limiting some reservations right now because of some staffing things that are happening, but how far out would we be willing? Does this fee schedule go right now? Should we say that when reservations will be made, we're allowing you to book out how far? 9 months, a year? I mean, like Maybury says, I don't think it should just be, that we allow people to book up. We want other groups to be able to get in there too.
So that's really a discretionary decision. I've seen lots of different arrangements. I believe what we did in Marysville for facilities was 6 months, that you could reserve up to 6 months in advance. I agree for a facility when you only have one and there's a lot of competing interest on the part of residents with other people who live in other places, maybe to use the one facility you have, allowing people probably a 1 year in advance preparation is probably not really fair to the rest of the community. But at the same time, if you're thinking about, a lot of people, if they're planning for, a big life event, obviously, unfortunately, memorial services are pretty more last minute than obviously, I think for obvious reasons, than other life events. But a wedding or, bar mitzvah or those, somebody's special birthday, those kinds of things you do know far enough in advance usually. So it seems like to me, balancing the community's interests and wants and needs against some of those bigger life events, a 6 month time frame would be a good compromise. That would be my recommendation.
I don't know that we've ever had any kind of limit before, frankly. I don't know that there was any kind of policy. I mean, I think 6 months limits you for things like the mitzvah, retirement parties, or like 50th birthdays or wedding anniversaries, because those are often planned a year in advance. But I think we could go ahead and give it a try and see what happens. Again, I think we won't get people who want to plan way in advance. That's all.
Well, I think it's fair though, especially given right now that we don't have a policy for K groups, and that some of those K groups may want to come in and say, hey, we would like to schedule, you know,
Yeah,
6th grade graduation. And if we've already got it booked up for,
right.
you know, somebody who we allowed to reserve a month early because we had a policy, that doesn't seem quite
Yeah.
fair yet.
That sounds good. Okay, so.
So those are all things I think that we should revisit in a sort of a global policy, and actually it would be, you know, helpful to have another meeting to discuss that, if it's okay with the pleasure of the board, again, with President Hassai and Director Sharis Watt. We met on the fee schedule. It seems appropriate to keep, you know, have this another meeting that covers sort of this global issue of the policy as well as the K groups, if that's okay.
Is that any objection to that on the board? Okay, so the motion before us, I would like to make a motion that we adopt the fee schedule as is presented to us, with the expectation that hopefully in August, we will have additional clarification and policies brought to the board.
I'll second that.
Go ahead and take the roll.
Director Deppie,
Yes.
Vice President Natoli,
Yes.
Director Sharis Watt,
Yes.
President Hassai.
Yes. Okay, so that is the conclusion of our special meeting. We, as I said at the beginning of our meeting, we had to continue a closed session. So we are adjourning we'll adjourn the special meeting and open up right now, I guess, or Ann, am I adjourning the meeting, or do I just open up for public comment before the closed session?
And you're on mute.
All right. Since we're in public session, I would just go ahead and open it up for public comment solely on the closed session item, and then we adjourn to the closed session.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. So we are now going to take public comment prior to going into our closed session meeting. And the topic of our closed session meeting is the conference with real property negotiators. Any comments from the public? There are none. So we will adjourn our special meeting. It's at 9:05 p.m. and the board will go into closed session, and then I will report out on this link later, I guess, about what we've come to, any decisions. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. And I guess the board will adjourn to a closed session link, correct? Okay.
Yes, the one before.
Yes. Good night,
Yes.
everybody.
Okay.